In this video, I'll be revealing my personal tier list for best bot lane partners for Maokai support. My primary goal for this tier list will be to help Maokai supports tailor their playstyle based on the ADC your bot lane partner has locked in. Nearly every ADC I present here is very viable with Maokai support, and I highly encourage you to combine the information from this tier list with your own opinion for the most optimal gameplay. We will be evaluating our bot lane partner based on the following criteria: champion kit synergy, early game for scaling potential, and self-sufficiency in lane. I'll be going over each tier in detail so that you have an idea of how you want to play the game based on your preferred playstyle. In the S+ tier, my number one ADC that I love to play with is Miss Fortune. I personally like playing with her since her E can slow down the enemy, allowing me to more easily land a twisted advance followed with a knockback. Once we are in favorable positions, Maokai's kit can also be comboed with Miss Fortune's ultimate, making it one of the strongest 2v2 bot lanes at level 6. Overall, Miss Fortune is the premier S+ ADC for Maokai support since she has a lot of early game damage, built-in slows in her kit, and an easy to use ultimate that synergizes extremely well with him. An important note is that to make the S+ tier, we also want to have semi-burst damage as well. Many ADCs usually require a certain level of items that scale with their attack speed before they do any damage early on. This is why I have also placed Kai'Sa in the S+ tier, since she has good all-in potential similar to Miss Fortune in the early game. Kai'Sa's plasma stacks will apply upon any immobilization effects from nearby allies, which makes her a great lane partner with Maokai support. Additionally, Kai'Sa is a very self-sufficient champion in 1v1 scenarios once she has her evolved Q, allowing Maokai to roam without worry. In the S tier, we have ADCs that I like to call safe wave clearers. They don't necessarily do a ton of early damage, but they provide the bot lane with stability. It's difficult to gank this bot lane since Ezreal can easily dash out, or Sivir can use her spell shield to avoid potential CC. As long as the lane isn't super volatile, you can roam around the map towards different lanes and objectives and act as a secondary jungler. Remember, one of Maokai's major strengths is his vision control, and if you are able to spread your saplings across the map, it will make it difficult for the enemy team to traverse. Staying in Fog of War is a great way to apply pressure in all three lanes, as the enemy will lack information as to where you are. Roaming also removes one of Maokai's weaknesses, which is laning strength, as you can accelerate the game state past laning phase with these ADCs. In general, you want to make sure your partner has at least half an item such as a Noon Quiver or Lost Chapter, making them self-sufficient before roaming heavily on the map. And of course, if you somehow have managed to get your bot lane supremely ahead, feel free to play around them as your win condition instead of perma-roaming. In the A+ tier, we have our hyper carries such as Jinx, Aphelios, Vayne, and Twitch. I like playing with hyper carries because they usually know that they can play safe and scale into the late game. These hyper carries often want lanes that can simply trade waves of farm until they reach the late game. It's important for these hyper carries to have a big body in front of them to help them peel while they do tons of damage in teamfights. These lanes don't usually hard win lane, but if they do, it's almost a guaranteed flawless victory. Don't feel too pressured to have to win lane until the opportunity arises. Your goal here as a Maokai support is to be super aware of the location of your hyper carries in teamfights and treat them as your primary win condition. As long as they have a few items, it won't matter how many kills they've collected, as they can easily 1v5 the game. I love linking a Knight's Vow with a nicely fed hyper carry so that it will be extremely difficult to shut them down. Lastly, I've put Senna in the A+ tier list as well due to the choice of a standard or a fasting Senna build path. She scales extremely well and provides additional slows for you to make an easy engage. Although she might not have the same damage profile as the other hyper carries, she makes Maokai nearly impossible to kill while still dealing an insane amount of damage and CC. In the A tier, we have the ego carries. These are champions that generally need to do well in the early game in order to be effective in the mid to late game. They provide a lot of damage in the early game due to their unique abilities and don't necessarily rely on scaling with attack speed. You'll also notice that these ADCs are generally quite short range. This can make it difficult for them to farm and can be easily outpoked by a superior 2v2 bot lane. His threat range is quite low, and if you end up having two champions with extremely short ranges, laning can be exceedingly difficult if your bot laner is unfamiliar with auto-spacing in tight situations. If I had to pick, I'd rather choose an engaged support like Nautilus or Leona, who have a much larger threat range to engage and are simply easier to snowball lanes with. These ego ADCs often rely on having their support to set up early kills as they combo well with any knockups or hard CC. All you have to remember is that these are high risk lanes since there is so little range in the 2v2 bot lane, but it is also quite high reward since the all-in potential with these carries is extremely devastating. You must win early or it may become difficult to recover into the late game. In the B+ tier, we have the sniper champions. They aren't bad lane partners for Maokai, as you can often combo your skills with their traps in order to make it difficult for the enemy to return damage. For example, if you root an enemy, make sure Caitlyn knows that you want to knock them back into a placed trap. Cait and Jhin are ADCs who want to win the early game, but not necessarily by all-inning the enemy team. They want to apply lane pressure by harassing the enemy with their extended range. Unfortunately, Maokai isn't the most dominating laning support, so applying lane pressure goes against his champion profile. The idea here for Maokai support is that if we are able to CC the enemy, they should die with front-loaded damage. However, Cait and Jhin often require the enemy to be chunked at low health before finishing them off. If you do want to play something with aggressive lane pressure who can help with the harass, I usually like pairing these ADCs with strong laning supports such as Zyra or Karma. Once Maokai engages in a teamfight with Twisted Advance, it can become quite difficult for him to disengage. If you are fully committed to fighting, you will need your ADCs to be somewhat nearby in order to not waste the precious engage. Cait and Jhin, however, have a lot of their damage profile packed into their ultimate, which is used from 3 screens away, which makes it somewhat opposite to how Maokai supports want to play, which is usually more up close and personal. In the B tier, we have champions who are very auto attack reliant. They are very similar to hyper carries, but in my opinion, these 4 specific champions simply do much better with a support that provides shields and heals to continually enhance their attack speed. In addition, these champions often require a movement speed buff to fully utilize their kit. Champions like Varus, Ashe, and Kog'Maw don't have the greatest self-peel and would benefit much greater with a designated enchanter peeler who can give them additional movement speed so that they can auto-space on their own terms. Xayah does have her ultimate for self-peel, but similar to the other carries in this tier, she really likes to fight on her own terms, placing feathers strategically before being able to snowball forward in a teamfight. Overall, it's not that these champions can't hyper carry with a tank support, but they more often rely on having a support that can play behind them, such as Soraka or Milio. Lastly, we have the F tier, and unfortunately, Zeri is a champion that I would generally not want to play with as Maokai support. She is similar to other hyper carries, where Zeri is a terrible laner and she isn't self-sufficient, meaning she can be easily dove. However, unlike other hyper carries, she doesn't really need anyone in front of her either, since she does her own thing jumping over walls, making it difficult for me to ever catch up to her. Her kit is enhanced specifically with shields, which is something Maokai support cannot provide. Lastly, Riot has nerfed her numbers so badly that I wouldn't recommend playing her unless you are a godlike Zeri player. Thanks for watching this League of Legends guide on the best bot lane partners for Maokai support. If you like this content, make sure to hit that like button. I'll also be releasing additional content around Maokai support, so consider hitting that subscribe button too. It really does help. If you have any thoughts regarding Maokai support, please let me know in the comments below.